My name is Irene Woolette, and I'm 32 years old. 5 years ago, my sister told my parents that I had dropped out of medical school. It was a lie, but that one lie destroyed my entire family relationship. They cut me out of their lives. They blocked my number. They didn't come to my residency graduation. They weren't there at my wedding either. For 5 long years, I was nobody's daughter. Then last month, my sister was rushed into the emergency room, bleeding badly, unconscious, close to death. The trauma team called for the chief surgeon. The doors opened, and when my mother saw the name on the white coat walking toward her daughter's stretcher, she grabbed my father's arm so tightly that it left marks on his skin. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly speaks to you. And write your vocation and local time in the comments. I'm curious to see where you're listening from right now. Now let me take you back to the fall of 2019, to a kitchen table in Hartford, Connecticut, and the last moment my father ever looked at me with something close to pride. Growing up, there were 2 daughters in the Woolette house, but only one who really seemed to matter. My sister Monica is 3 years older than me. From the moment she could walk and talk, she was performing. School plays, student council, talent shows. She was the girl who could charm every adult at a dinner party and make the whole table laugh. My parents, Jerry and Diane Woolette, typical middle-class people from Hartford, Connecticut, absolutely adored her for it. Dad managed a manufacturing plant. Mom worked part-time doing bookkeeping. To them, 2 things mattered more than anything else: appearances and obedience. The one who spent Thanksgiving with her nose in a biology textbook, while Monica entertained everyone at the table. I wasn't rebellious. I wasn't difficult. I was simply invisible. There's a difference between being forgotten and never really being seen at all. Here's a small example. In 8th grade, I made it to the state science fair. I was the only student from our school to qualify. That same weekend, Monica had a performance with her community theater group. You can probably guess where my parents decided to go. When I came home later with a 2nd-place ribbon, Dad glanced at it and said, "That's nice, Renee." He never asked what my project was about. Not once. I told myself it didn't hurt. I convinced myself that I didn't need attention. Instead, I poured everything into school. My grades, my AP classes, my college applications. I believed that if I couldn't be the daughter they noticed, I could at least become the daughter they couldn't ignore. And for one short shining moment that actually happened, the day I was accepted into Oregon Health and Science University's medical program, almost 3,000 miles away from Hartford, something changed. For the first time in my life, my father looked at me, really looked at me, and said 5 words I had waited 18 years to hear. But I'll get to that part in a moment. First, you need to understand what Monica did when she realized the attention in the house was shifting. The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in April. I remember clearly because Monica happened to be visiting that weekend. She was 22 at the time, working as a marketing coordinator at a mid-level firm in Stamford. It was a fine job, a fine life. But fine was Monica's ceiling, even though she would never admit that out loud. Dad read the letter slowly. At the kitchen table, his eyebrows lifted. "Oregon Health and Science," he said carefully, almost tasting the words. "That's a real medical school." Then he looked up at me. "Maybe you'll make something of yourself after all, Renee." It wasn't exactly praise. Not really. But it was the closest thing to a compliment he had ever given me, and I held onto it like oxygen. That night, Mom called Aunt Ruth. She called her sister. She even called 2 of the neighbors. Irene got into medical school. Can you believe it? Her voice had a tone I had never heard before. Pride, real pride, directed at me. At dinner, I looked across the table at Monica. She was smiling, but it was the kind of smile that stops at the lips. Her eyes were doing something very different, measuring, calculating, adjusting. I understand that now, Back then, I just thought she was tired from the drive. During the following weeks, Monica started calling me more often, 2 or 3 times every week. How's the packing going? Who's your roommate? What's Portland like? She asked about my classes, my schedule, my classmates, even my professors. She remembered every name I mentioned. I thought my sister was finally starting to see me. I believed that getting into medical school had opened some new door between us. Maybe respect, maybe connection, maybe the kind of bond normal sisters have. I didn't realize was that I was giving her ammunition. Every detail, every name, every moment of weakness. I handed it all over with a grateful smile. By my 3rd year of medical school, everything finally broke apart. My roommate and best friend was a woman named Sarah Mitchell. Sarah had grown up in foster care and didn't have any real family. She was also the main reason I survived my 1st year of medical school. Once during a brutal anatomy exam week, I called home hoping for encouragement. My mom answered and immediately said, "Can't talk right now, Renee. Monica's having a rough day at work." It was Sarah who sat with me on the apartment floor after that call and said, "Their loss. Now, get up. We have cadavers to memorize." Sarah was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer in August of my 3rd year. No family, no support system, just me. The next morning, I went to the dean's office and explained everything. He approved a formal leave of absence for 1 semester under caregiver status. The paperwork was filed, my spot in the program was protected, and I would return in January. Everything was official. Everything was documented. I moved into the spare bedroom in Sarah's apartment. I drove her to chemotherapy appointments. I sat beside her in the oncology ward at 3 in the morning when the pain became so intense she couldn't breathe. At some point, I called Monica to tell her, I'm still not sure why I did that. Maybe I still believed she was the sister she had been pretending to be. I explained everything. Sarah's diagnosis, my leave of absence, my plan to return to school in the spring semester. Monica's voice sounded sweet and soft. "Oh my God, Renee, I'm so sorry. Take all the time you need. I won't tell Mom and Dad. They'd only worry." 3 days later, she called our parents. I didn't know the exact words she used that night. I wouldn't understand the full size of the lie until 5 years later, when everything finally came apart in the most unexpected place. But the damage happened instantly. The phone call came at 11 at night. I was sitting in a plastic chair beside Sarah's hospital bed. She had reacted badly to a round of chemo, and the doctors admitted her overnight. My phone lit up. "Dad, double quotes. Your sister told us everything." His voice was cold and flat. The dropping out, the boyfriend. All of it. "Dad, that's not." Monica showed us the messages. She showed us proof. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. What messages? What proof? "Dad, I'm literally sitting in a hospital right now, taking care of my friend. Monica said you'd say exactly that." There was a pause. "She said you'd have a story ready." Then my mother came onto the line. Her voice was shaking. "How could you lie to us for a whole year, Irene? Mom, please listen. I filed a leave of absence. I can show you the paperwork. I can give you the dean's phone number." "Enough," Dad interrupted. "Don't call this house again until you're ready to tell the truth. You've embarrassed this family enough." The line went dead. Sarah's phone machine beeped quietly behind the curtain. My phone screen still showed the call duration. 4 minutes and 12 seconds. How long it took my parents to erase me. 20 minutes later, I received a text from Monica. "I'm sorry, Renee. I had to tell them. I couldn't keep your secret anymore." She wasn't sorry. She had just carried out the most precise attack of her life, and she signed it with a broken heart emoji. I was 3,000 miles away from Hartford. I had $4 in my checking account. And in that moment, I had officially become nobody's daughter. I tried to fix it. I need you to understand that part. Over the next 5 days, I called my parents 14 times. The first 3 calls went to voicemail. By the 4th call, Dad had blocked my number. Mom blocked me 2 days later. I sent 2 emails, one short message and one very long one. The long email included my official leave of absence, paperwork as a PDF. I added the dean's direct phone number. I listed Sarah's oncologist. I provided every single piece of proof a reasonable person could ask for. Neither email received a reply then. I wrote a handwritten letter and mailed it priority from Portland. 5 days later, it came back, returned. To sender. Unopened. I recognized my mother's handwriting on the envelope. I called Aunt Ruth, Dad's younger sister, the only person in our entire family who had ever treated me like I mattered just as much as Monica. Ruth called Dad that same evening. I know because she called me back 40 minutes later. Her voice sounded heavy. He told me to stay out of it. Sweetheart, she said. He said you've made your bed. Ruth tried to explain the leave of absence to him. Dad hung up on her. 5 days, 14 phone calls, 2 emails, 1 letter, 1 family member trying to help. Every single attempt rejected, blocked, or sent back. And the worst part is this: it wasn't new. This was the pattern of my entire life, just compressed into the most brutal version of itself. Every science fair they chose to skip. Every recital they somehow forgot. Every moment when Monica's version of what happened was accepted without any doubt while my side was pushed aside. This was simply the last and loudest example of it. On the 6th day, I stopped making calls. Not because I had given up, but because I finally understood they had made their decision a long time ago. Monica had simply given them the excuse they needed to stop pretending everything was fine. Sarah passed away on a quiet Sunday morning in December. It was peaceful in a way that almost felt unreal. Just the soft beep of the monitor turning into a flat line and the pale winter sunlight coming through the hospice window. I was the only person sitting in the room. No one from my family called. No one knew what had happened. The one person I had told, Monica, was too busy protecting the lie she had started to care that the real reason for my leave of absence had just taken her last breath. I arranged a small funeral. Only 6 people came. Sarah's former foster sister drove all the way from Eugene. 2 of my classmates showed up. A nurse from the oncology ward came too because she had grown very fond of Sarah during those long hospital visits. I stood at the front of a chapel that could hold 60 people and read a eulogy while staring at rows and rows of empty benches. I didn't cry, not because my heart wasn't shattered, but because I had already been crying for 3 straight months, and there was nothing left inside me to give. That night, I sat alone in Sarah's apartment, which had also been my apartment for a while. Her coffee mug was still sitting on the counter like she had just walked away from it. Her jacket was still hanging on the hook beside the door. Everything looked exactly the same, but the silence in the room felt heavier than anything I had ever known. I opened my laptop and looked at the application form. To re-enroll for the spring semester. My fingers just rested on the keyboard while I stared at the screen. Then I noticed something tucked inside Sarah's copy of Grey's Anatomy. It had been our little running joke for years. I opened the book and found a yellow sticky note marking the chapter about the pancreas. Written on the note in her handwriting, shaky but careful, were the words, "Rude was a card." Underneath it, she had written another message. "Finish what you started, Irene. Become the doctor I know you are. And don't you dare let anyone, especially your own blood, decide who you are." She had written it weeks before she died. She must have known she wouldn't be there when I needed encouragement the most. I closed the laptop. Then, after a moment, I opened it again and slowly filled out the re-enrollment form. There were really only 2 choices in front of me. I could collapse and let everything fall apart, or I could climb my way back up. I chose to climb, not for my parents, not for revenge either. I did it for Sarah, and for the version of myself that she believed in. Even when I couldn't see it anymore, I returned in January with no support from family and no safety net waiting for me. I took out more student loans, accepted a part-time research assistant job, and ate hospital cafeteria leftovers more times than I will ever admit. Out loud, medical school does not slow down for your personal problems. Anatomy exams do not pause because your family has rejected you. 12-hour clinical rotations do not get shorter just because you cried in the supply closet at 2 a.m. So eventually, I stopped crying and started working. I worked like my life depended on it, because in some ways it really did. I graduated on time. No one from Hartford came to watch. Not one person from my family showed up. I matched into a surgical residency at Mercerist Medical Center back on the East Coast. It was a level 1 trauma center and one of the busiest hospitals in Connecticut. That was where I met Dr. Margaret Thornton. Maggie was 58 years old, the former chief of surgery, and built like a steel cable wrapped inside a white lab coat. She became the mentor I had desperately needed and, in many ways, the mother figure I had lost. During my 3rd year of residency, I met Nathan Caldwell. He was a civil rights attorney doing pro bono work at a community clinic close to the hospital. He had calm eyes and a dry sense of humor that made even the worst days feel lighter. He was the first person I told my entire story to who didn't flinch, didn't feel sorry for me, and didn't try to fix everything. He simply listened. When I finished, he looked at me and said, "You deserve better." Just for simple words, but they were enough. We got married on a warm Saturday afternoon in Maggie's backyard. About 30 guests came. Nathan's father walked me down the aisle since my own father was not there. I had mailed an invitation to Hartford, but it came back exactly the same way my letter had years earlier, unopened. Aunt Ruth was there though, and she cried enough tears for 2 missing parents. After the ceremony, Maggie handed me a sealed envelope. "A nomination," she said. "Don't open it yet. You're not ready." I placed it in my desk drawer and didn't ask any questions. 5 years went by. During that time, I slowly became someone my parents probably wouldn't even recognize anymore. Now I need to pause here for a moment. If you have ever been in a situation where your own family refused to listen to your side of the story, where the truth didn't matter because someone else's lie was louder, drop a fire in the comments. And if you believe my parents are eventually going to regret what they did, type karma. Let's keep going because what happened next was something even I never expected. It's January in the present day. I'm 32 years old now. I'm the chief of trauma surgery at Mercerist Medical Center. I live in a small house in the suburbs with a porch that gets beautiful morning sunlight. I have a husband who makes me laugh every single day and a golden retriever named Hippocrates, Hippo for short, who has never once judged me for eating cereal at midnight. It's a good life. A real one. Built slowly, brick by brick, with my own hands, but there's a certain kind of ache that never fully disappears. It sits quietly in the hollow space between your ribs where a family is supposed to live. I don't wake up crying anymore. I don't check my phone hoping to see a Hartford area code calling me back. But every Thanksgiving there is a small moment. When I set the table, count the plates, and feel the absence like a phantom limb, Aunt Ruth still calls every Sunday. She is my only thin thread back to that world. I never ask about the rest of them, but I listen whenever she shares something. Mom and Dad are healthy. Monica got divorced 2 years ago and now sells medical devices. The irony of that situation is not lost on me. Last week Ruth called and her voice sounded different. "Careful, nervous, Irene," she said. "There's something I need to tell you about Monica, something worrying." Before she could finish speaking, my hospital pager suddenly went off. Trauma activation. I told Ruth I would call her back later. I never got that chance because what Ruth had been trying to warn me about was already on its way to me, speeding down Interstate 91 at 60 miles per hour in a sedan that was about to run a red light. Within the next hour, the thing Ruth wanted to warn me about would be lying on my operating table, bleeding heavily, while my parents sat in the waiting room and my name appeared on the patient chart. I just didn't know it yet. Let me go back for a moment, because what Monica did was not just one lie, it was a full campaign. Over the years, Ruth slowly gave me pieces of information, very carefully, like someone trying to disarm a bomb, one wire at a time. The picture she described was worse than anything I had imagined. For 5 years, Monica continued the same story at every Thanksgiving dinner, every Christmas gathering, every family event. She played the role of the sad older sister. "We don't really talk about Irene anymore," she would tell relatives quietly. "It's too painful for Mom and Dad." She would shake her head gently, lower her voice, and let the silence finish the story. But she didn't stop there. She added more details. To make the story stronger, she told our grandmother that I was homeless. She told Uncle Pete's wife that mutual friends had said I was going in and out of rehab 2 Christmases ago. She told our mother that she had tried to contact me, but I refused to speak to her, that I was the one who had cut them off. She turned the entire story upside down. At Thanksgiving, Ruth once told me with anger in her voice, Monica said, "I've begged Irene to come home. She won't even answer my calls. I think she hates us." At that exact time, I had been 3 floors deep inside an operating room trying to save a teenager's life. The twisted brilliance of her plan, and I use that word with complete disgust, was that Monica did not need my parents to forget me. She needed them to believe that I had abandoned them. That way, their sadness became proof of the story. Their silence became justified, and Monica remained exactly what she had always been, the loyal daughter who stayed. She wasn't protecting them, she was protecting her position. There was also one more thing Ruth told me much later that made the entire picture even darker, but I will get to that part soon.
Nathan shared something else with me over coffee one morning about 6 months ago. It was something he had kept quiet about for almost 2 years. "There's something I never told you," he said, while carefully setting his coffee mug on the table. The same careful way he does when he is about to deliver difficult news, using his calm lawyer voice. "2 years ago, I received a call from HR at your old hospital. Someone using a fake name contacted them asking about the employment status of Irene Ulett. They wanted to know if you had ever been disciplined or if your medical credentials were actually real." I stared at him, shocked. "Who?" I asked softly. "I had a colleague trace the request," Nathan replied. The IP address led back to Hartford. The kitchen suddenly felt very still and quiet. Hippo's tail tapped lightly against the floor, while the coffee machine released a low hissing sound. "She was searching for something," I said slowly. "Anything," Nathan confirmed. "Anything she could use to keep the story alive and prove that you were a fraud." "She didn't find anything," he added. "Of course she didn't," I said, "because there was nothing there to find." I wrapped my hands tightly around my mug and felt the heat move through the ceramic. "She didn't just lie about me once, Nathan," I said quietly. "She's been tracking me." He reached across the table and gently placed his hand over mine. "That's not normal sibling rivalry, Irene," he said softly. "That's something else entirely." He was right. Monica hadn't told one lie, and then simply moved on with her life. She had built an entire structure of lies. Strong walls, reinforced beams, and for 5 long years she worked carefully to make sure none of it ever cracked. Every holiday story, every quiet rumor, every fake inquiry was just another brick in the wall she had built around the truth. I could have done something back then. I could have called a lawyer, confronted my parents, exposed the whole truth. But I didn't, because life was about to do it for me in the most brutal, public, and strangely ironic way possible. And it all started with a pager going off at 3 in the morning, Thursday night, January 3:07 a.m. The pager pulled me out of a deep sleep. Nathan shifted beside me in bed and murmured something half awake. Ipo lifted his head from the foot of the bed, ears alert. The small screen glowed brightly in the dark room. Level 1 trauma. MVC, single female, 35. Blunt abdominal trauma, hemodynamically unstable. ETA 8 minutes. I was dressed in 4 minutes and inside my car in 6. The streets were empty and slightly slick from recent rain. That deep black darkness January gives the roads in Connecticut surrounded everything. While driving, I ran through the case in my mind the way I always do. Mechanism of injury, possible organ damage, surgical options, motor vehicle collision, blunt abdominal trauma, unstable vital signs, likely splenic rupture, possible liver tear. I had performed this operation hundreds of times. I badged in through the ambulance entrance and walked directly toward the trauma bay. My team was already gathering. 2 residents, a trauma nurse, anesthesia waiting nearby. I picked up the intake iPad from the charge nurse's desk and swiped to the incoming patient file. Patient Monica Ulett, DOB, March 14th, 1990. Emergency contact, Gerald Ulett, father. I stopped walking. The sounds of the hallway, the monitors beeping, the intercom announcements, the squeak of shoes on the linoleum floor, faded away like a wave pulling back from the shore. For 2 seconds, maybe 3, I wasn't a surgeon anymore. I was 26 again, sitting on a hospital floor in Portland, my phone still warm in my hand, listening to an empty dial tone. Dr. Ulett? My charge nurse, Linda, appeared beside me. You okay? I blinked and set the iPad down. I'm fine, I said calmly. Prep Bay 2 and page Dr. Patel. I want him on standby. The distant scream of an ambulance siren grew louder, and behind that ambulance, even before I saw them, I knew there would be 2 people I had not faced in 5 years. The ambulance doors swung open, and the stretcher rolled in quickly. Monica was strapped down, unconscious. The oxygen mask fogged with each shallow breath. Blood stained her shirt. One arm hung loosely over the side rail. The paramedics called out numbers rapidly. Blood pressure dropping, heart rate climbing. 2 large bore IV lines wide open. Behind them running came my parents. My mother looked 10 years older than I remembered. Her hair was thinner and her face pale and tight. She was wearing a bathrobe with slippers on the wrong feet. My father had thrown on jeans and a flannel shirt in a hurry. His face looked as pale as old paper. "That's my daughter," he shouted past the triage nurse. "Where are you taking her? I need to speak to the doctor in charge." The nurse, Carla, someone I had worked with for 3 years, raised both hands gently. "Sir, family members need to wait in the surgical waiting area. The trauma team is already here. The chief is handling this personally." "The chief?" Dad grabbed her arm. "Get me the chief right now." Carla glanced through the glass partition toward the trauma bay. She saw me already gowned and gloved, my badge hanging from my scrub top. She read the name. Her eyes widened slightly. I gave the smallest shake of my head. "Not now." Carla recovered quickly. "Sir, the chief is preparing for surgery. You'll be updated as soon as possible. Please follow me to the waiting room." My parents were guided down the hallway. Mom was whispering prayers under her breath, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Dad kept turning around, looking through every window they passed. "She's all we have," he said to no one in particular. "Please, she's all we have." I heard every word through the glass partition. "She's all we have," as if I had never even been born. I stepped into the scrub room alone. 30 seconds, that's all I allowed myself. I turned on the faucet and let the hot water run over my hands. I looked up at my reflection in the stainless steel mirror above the sink. The metal surface warped my face slightly. Distorted, exactly how everything felt in that moment. Scrub cap on, badge visible. The face of a woman who had been surgically removed from her own family tree. And now I was being asked to surgically save the woman who had held the saw. Part of me wanted to walk out. Call Patel. Let someone else handle it. Let my parents owe their daughter's life to a stranger instead of me. That would have been easier, cleaner. But there was a woman on that table with a ruptured spleen and what looked like a grade 3 liver laceration. She was bleeding faster than we could replace the blood. She would die within the next 30 to 40 minutes if the best surgeon in this hospital didn't operate. And the best surgeon in the building was me. I paged Patel directly. "I have a conflict of interest," I told him. "The patient is a family member. I'm disclosing it now and documenting it in the chart. If my judgment becomes compromised, you take over immediately." Patel's voice remained calm. Understood, Chief. I told Linda to record the disclosure in the nursing notes. Everything by protocol, everything properly documented. Then I pulled on fresh gloves, pushed through the OR doors and looked down at the table. My sister's face was bruised. The oxygen mask fogged and cleared with each breath. She looked smaller than I remembered. Thinner. There were faint worry lines around her eyes that hadn't existed 5 years ago. For 3 seconds, she wasn't the woman who ruined my life. She was simply a patient lying on my table. And that was exactly what I needed her to be. Let's go, I said. Scalpel. 3 hours and 40 minutes. That's how long it took to repair what the steering wheel and a red traffic light had destroyed. Ruptured spleen, removed. Grade 3 liver laceration, carefully repaired with precise sutures, layer by layer. Internal bleeding from 2 mesenteric vessels, clamped, cauterized, controlled. I only spoke when necessary. Suction, clamp, lap pad, retract. My hands moved the way they had been trained to move. Steady, deliberate, fast when speed mattered, slow when accuracy mattered more. The residents watched closely. They always did during my operations. I could feel their attention sharpen when the liver repair became difficult. I didn't hesitate. I couldn't afford to. But something deep inside me had changed. For 5 long years, I had been the daughter who simply vanished from the family. Now I was the surgeon who had just dragged her sister back from the very edge of death. Those 2 truths were about to crash into each other in a waiting room only 40 feet away, right in front of my entire night shift team. I straightened my scrub top. I checked my badge. I took one slow, steady breath. Then I started walking toward the waiting room. The hallway had never seemed this long before. The waiting room had that strange, quiet stillness hospitals get around 7 in the morning. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above. 2 other families sat far apart in opposite corners. A television quietly played a weather report that no one was really watching. In the center row, sitting stiff, tired, and clearly frightened, were my parents. I pushed open the double doors. I was still wearing my surgical scrubs. My mask hung loose around my neck. My scrub cap was off, and my hair was tied back neatly. My badge hung clearly at chest level. Anyone standing 6 feet away could read it without any effort. Dr. Irene Hewlett, MD, Fax. Chief of Trauma Surgery. Dad stood up first. He always stood first. That had always been his habit. His quiet way of showing control in every situation. Doctor, how is she? Is Monica? He stopped speaking in the middle of the sentence. His eyes dropped to my badge, then slowly lifted to my face. Then they went down again to the badge. I watched recognition spread across his expression like something physical. A small tremor began in his hands and slowly moved upward into his jaw. Mom looked up a second later. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Her hand shot forward and grabbed Dad's forearm, her fingers digging tightly into the flannel sleeve so hard that later I would find out it left 4 deep bruises shaped exactly like fingertips. 5 seconds of silence. 5 seconds carrying the weight of 5 years. I spoke first. Calm, professional. The same voice I use with every family in this room. Mr. and Mrs. Hewlett. I'm Dr. Hewlett, Chief of Trauma Surgery. Your daughter Monica suffered a ruptured spleen and a grade 3 liver laceration during the accident. The surgery was successful. She is stable now and currently in the ICU. You will be able to see her in about 1 hour. Mr. and Mrs., not Mom and Dad. I watched the words land. I watched them cut deep. Behind me, through the glass wall, Linda and 2 nurses were watching. From their faces, I could already tell they had figured everything out. My mother moved first. She stepped toward me, her arms rising, a sob already breaking out of her chest. Irene, oh my God, oh my God. Irene. I stepped back slightly. Just half a step, calm but very clear. She froze. Her hands stayed hanging in the air between us for a moment. And then slowly, painfully, they dropped back down to her sides. Dad's voice came out rough, like gravel being dragged across concrete. You're a doctor. I am. You're the chief. Yes. But Monica said, what exactly? He closed his mouth, opened it again, then shut it once more. I could almost see the gears in his mind trying to rebuild 5 years of certainty that was breaking apart right in front of him. Mom was crying now, not quietly anymore. We thought you quit school. We thought she told us you would. She told you I dropped out, I said calmly. That I had a boyfriend with a drug problem. That I was homeless. That I refused to contact you. My voice stayed steady. No shaking, no tears. I had imagined this moment thousands of times, in the shower, in my car, lying awake in the dark before sleep. I just never imagined it would happen while I was wearing surgical scrubs under bright hospital lights. None of it was true, I continued. Not one word of it. Through the glass behind me, I saw Carla lift her hand to cover her mouth. A resident, Dr. Kimura, turned his head away, his jaw tight. Linda slowly set her clipboard down and stared. Dad tried to redirect the conversation. Old habit. This isn't the time or the place for this, Irene. Your sister is in the ICU. I know, I said calmly. I just spent 3 hours and 40 minutes making sure she stays alive. So yes, Dad. I know exactly where she is. He had no reply. For the first time in my entire life, my father, a man who always had a command ready, had absolutely nothing to say. The silence was doing work I could never have done myself. 5 years of blocked calls, returned letters, ignored emails. None of that had changed anything. But standing here alive, successful, and wearing the proof on my badge spoke louder than any message I could have sent. Mom reached for the back of a chair to steady herself. The letters, she whispered. You said you sent letters. 2 emails with my leave of absence paperwork attached. 1 handwritten letter sent by priority mail. You sent it back unopened. I recognized your handwriting on the envelope. She pressed her fist against her mouth. Dad kept staring at the floor. I called 14 times in 5 days, I continued. I asked Aunt Ruth to talk to you. You told her to stay out of it. I wasn't accusing anyone. I was simply stating facts. Facts do not need raised voices. At that moment, Linda appeared at the doorway. She didn't know the full story yet, but she had hospital business to handle. Dr. Ulett, I'm sorry to interrupt. The board chair saw the overnight trauma log. He asked me to pass along a message. The Physician of the Year Selection Committee sends their congratulations for tonight's surgical outcome. Linda said it in the same normal tone she used for everyday announcements. She had no idea she had just set off another explosion. Mom looked at me, her eyes swollen, mascara gone, still wearing her bathrobe. Physician of the Year? It's an internal award, I said calmly. Nothing special. I turned back to Linda. Thank you. I need to check post-op vitals. Excuse me. I walked toward the ICU hallway with steady steps and my back straight. I didn't turn around, but I heard my mother's broken voice behind me, small and destroyed. Jerry, what have we done? And then I heard something I had never heard before in my entire life. My father saying nothing at all, because for the first time silence was the only honest thing he had left. 4 hours later, ICU room 6, the monitor beeping steadily while morning sunlight slipped through the blinds. I walked in to perform the normal post-op check. Vitals, drainage levels, wound inspection, routine steps. Except nothing about this situation was routine. Monica's eyes were open. They looked glassy and unfocused from the anesthesia, but they were open. She blinked at the ceiling, blinked at the IV stand. She called 14 times. She asked Ruth to step in and help. Mom's voice sounded empty and distant. Is that true? She's exaggerating. You know how she is. Ruth tried to explain things to us. Dad spoke again, and this time his voice cracked. Not because of sadness, but because everything he had believed for 5 long years was starting to fall apart. 2 years ago, Ruth called and said Irene was in residency, training to be a surgeon. You told us Ruth was lying, that she was only creating drama. Ruth doesn't know the whole story. What is the whole story, Monica? Mom shouted inside the ICU room. The nurse at the station outside jumped at the sound. 2 rooms down, a visitor slowly looked up from their phone. Monica, trapped in the corner with IV lines in both arms and my stitches holding her abdomen closed, did what she had always done. She moved from defense to attack. Fine, she's a doctor, good for her. But she left this family, she never called. Because we blocked her number, Monica. Dad's hand gripped the bed rail so hard his knuckles turned white. Because you told us to. The heart monitor continued its steady beeping. The IV drip kept running. And Monica, maybe for the first time in her adult life, didn't have a prepared story ready. Aunt Ruth arrived in the ICU at 9:45 that morning. I had called her from the scrub room after the surgery, not to use her like a weapon, but because Monica was also her niece, and Ruth deserved to know. But Ruth came ready. 5 years of silence will do that to a person who keeps records and remembers everything clearly. She didn't sit down. She didn't hug anyone. She stood in the center of the room and said, I have been waiting 5 years to have this conversation, and I am not waiting 1 more minute. She pulled out her phone and opened a folder she had labeled As I later found out, Irene proof inside. Screenshots of every email I had sent my parents during those desperate early days. The PDF of my leave of absence from OSU signed by the dean, complete with the registrar's official stamp. My re-enrollment confirmation. A photo from my residency graduation. Me wearing a cap and holding my diploma. Aunt Ruth standing next to me. The only family member in the picture. She held the phone forward. Mom took it with shaking hands. And here, Ruth said, while swiping to another message thread, "This text is from Monica, sent to me 4 years ago." She read it out loud. "Don't tell Mom and Dad about Irene's residency. It will only confuse them. They're finally at peace." The room went completely silent. Monica stared up at the ceiling. Her jaw was tight, but the calculating look in her eyes had disappeared. What replaced it was something I had never seen there before. The expression of someone who had run out of places to hide. "You told me to stay quiet for the sake of the family," Ruth said, looking straight at Monica. "But this family hasn't had peace. It has lived through 5 years of darkness." Ruth then turned to my parents, "And you two allowed this to happen. Not because you didn't love Irene, but because loving Monica was easier." No one argued. There was nothing left to argue about. Mom slowly sank down into the chair beside Monica's bed, but she wasn't looking at Monica anymore. She was scrolling through Ruth's phone, reading my emails one by one. Her lips moved quietly as she read them. Then she stopped at the last one, the one I had sent the night before my residency graduation. I know exactly what it says. I have read it again and again, maybe 100 times, sitting in my own sent folder. "Mom, I don't know if you will ever read this. I graduated from residency today. I really wish you were here. I am still your daughter. I never stopped being your daughter." Mom bent forward in the chair, not exactly crying. It was deeper than that. It sounded like someone finally facing the full weight of a mistake that can never be undone. Dad stood by the window with his back toward the room, his shoulders shaking slightly. Aunt Ruth later told me it was the first time she had ever seen her older brother cry in 62 years. Not once before. Not when their mother passed away. Not when his business nearly collapsed. Never. But he cried now, quietly staring out at the parking lot, while the heart monitor continued beeping behind him. Monica was lying in the hospital bed. She had stopped talking completely. The IV continued dripping slowly. Her eyes stayed fixed on one spot on the ceiling. There was nothing left for her to perform anymore. No audience left who believed the story she had built. The personality she had worn for 35 years was now lying in broken pieces on the hospital floor, and no amount of charm, tears, or clever explanations was going to rebuild it. "You missed her wedding, Jerry." Ruth's voice had become softer now, tired after everything. Nathan's father walked her down the aisle. "Do you understand what that means?" Dad didn't turn away from the window, but he spoke. 4 quiet words that sounded cracked right down the middle. "What have we done?" It wasn't really a question. He wasn't asking anyone. He was judging himself, and knowing the truth and knowing how to live with it are 2 very different things. I came back later that afternoon at the end of my shift, 22 hours after the pager had woken me up. But who is really counting? My parents were still there. Of course they were. Where else could they go? Back to the house where they had spent 5 years acting like they only had one daughter. Mom stood up the second I entered the room. Her face was swollen and red. Her eyes almost closed from crying so much. "Irene, baby, I'm so sorry. I gently raised my hand, calm but firm. "I hear you, and I do believe you're sorry. But sorry is only a word. It's a starting point. It isn't the finish line. What I need right now is time." Dad finally turned away from the window. He looked like he had aged 5 years just since that morning. "We want to make this right. Then you need to understand something." I kept my voice steady. This wasn't anger anymore. This was clarity. The kind that only comes after every other emotion has burned away, and what remains is the truth, clean and simple. I'm not the girl you sent away. I'm not the girl who begged you to listen for 5 days from 3,000 miles away. I'm someone who built an entire life without you. A full life. And if you want to be part of that life now, it will be on my terms. Not Monica's, not yours. Mine. Dad opened his mouth out of old habit, ready to argue. Then he closed it again and slowly nodded. A small broken nod. I looked over at Monica in the hospital bed. Her eyes were open, watching me quietly. "When you recover," I said, You and I are going to have a real conversation, but not today. Today you're my patient. I don't mix the two. Then I left the room. My back straight, my steps calm and steady. I didn't turn around. I'm not closing the door forever, but I am the one who decides when it opens, how wide it opens, and who is allowed to walk through it. 2 weeks later, Monica was discharged from the hospital. Her surgical incision was healing well. The rest of her life, not so much. I chose the meeting place. A coffee shop in Middletown, halfway between her apartment and my house. Neutral ground. Nathan came with me but sat at another table near the window, pretending to read legal briefs. Honestly, he wasn't really pretending. That man can read legal documents anywhere. Monica walked in looking like someone who had been hollowed out from the inside. She had lost weight. Surgery combined with not eating will do that. The confidence she normally wore, like perfume, had disappeared. For the first time I could remember, my older sister looked exactly her real age. She sat down across from me and wrapped her hands around a cup of coffee she never actually drank. Her eyes stayed on the table. I didn't waste time with small talk. I'm not going to yell at you. I'm not going to repeat every lie you told. You already know what you did. What I want to understand is why. There was silence for so long that the barista called someone's name, and it echoed through the shop before fading away again. Finally, she spoke quietly. Because you were going to become everything I wasn't, and I couldn't handle that. I let those words sit between us for a moment. That's honest, I said. The first honest thing you've said to me in 10 years. I'm sorry, Irene. I know you are. But sorry doesn't give me back those years. Sorry doesn't put Dad at my wedding. Sorry doesn't undo that box Mom mailed back to me. My high school graduation things returned like I was dead to her. She looked away and her eyes filled with tears. Real tears. I know the difference now. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. I also called your medical school twice. I tried to get them to cancel your leave of absence. I told them you had faked the caregiver paperwork. The coffee shop buzzed softly around us. I stared at her. Your dean wouldn't listen to me. He protected you. He didn't protect me, Monica. He trusted the truth. That isn't the same thing. I leaned back in my chair and slowly drew in a long breath. This was the moment I had thought about the night before while sitting on the kitchen floor. Ipo's head resting heavily on my lap, while Nathan went through everything with me the way he would review a case before presenting it in court. I'm not cutting you out of my life completely, I said quietly. But there will be conditions. Monica nodded without arguing. You will tell the truth. The entire truth. To every single family member you lied to. Every aunt. Every uncle. Every cousin who spent 5 years believing I was in rehab or wandering somewhere with no home. I will, she said softly. And you'll do it in writing. An email sent to the entire family group. All 47 people. Aunt Ruth will make sure everyone actually receives it. She nodded again. I met with my parents separately the following week. Nathan drove me there and waited in the car while I went inside. We sat around their kitchen table. The same table where Dad had once read my medical school acceptance letter years ago. The same table where Monica had smiled that careful smile that never quite reached her eyes. I'm willing to try rebuilding our relationship, I told them. But you both need to attend family counseling. Not for me. For yourselves. You need to understand why you believed a lie about your own daughter and never once picked up the phone to check the truth. Dad's jaw tightened immediately. We don't do that kind of thing in this family. That's exactly why we're sitting here like this right now, Dad. Mom gently placed her hand on his arm. Jerry, please. He looked at her first. Then he looked back at me. Something inside his eyes shifted slightly. Not fully open yet, but cracked just enough to notice. Fine, he said. I stood up to leave but paused before walking out. One more thing. Nathan's father walked me down the aisle. That already happened. We can't change it now, but if you want the chance to know your future grandchildren someday, you start now. Not with big emotional speeches, with consistency. Apologies fade away. Boundaries don't. 1 month later came the Physician of the Year Gala. 200 people filled the large ballroom of the Hartford Marquis Hotel. Surgeons, department leaders, hospital administrators, donors, and board members. Crystal glasses clinked softly. Name tags hung from blue lanyards. A string quartet played classical music that almost nobody was actually listening to. I wore a simple black dress. Nathan sat at a table close to the stage, looking as if he had been born wearing a tailored suit. Maggie Thornton sat beside him with her arms folded and the smallest satisfied smile on her face. The kind she saves for moments she has quietly helped guide into existence over many years. The host stepped up to the podium. This year's Physician of the Year is a surgeon whose skill, calmness under pressure, and deep dedication to her patients have raised the standard for this entire hospital. Dr. Irene Ulett, Chief of Trauma Surgery. Applause filled the room. My surgical team even stood up from their table. I walked up to the stage. The spotlight felt warm against my face, and the podium felt steady under my hands. I kept my speech brief. 5 years ago, I almost left medicine. Not because I couldn't handle the work, but because I lost the people I believed I needed in order to keep going. What I learned later is that the people you truly need are not always the ones you are born into. Sometimes they are the people who choose you. I looked toward Maggie, then Nathan, then my surgical team sitting together in the third row. After that, I looked toward the very back of the ballroom, 2 seats that Ruth had quietly arranged earlier. My parents were sitting there. Mum wore a navy dress she had probably bought earlier that week. Dad wore a tie he clearly hated. They sat with their hands folded neatly in their laps, looking at the stage with expressions that could only be described as grief and pride fighting each other across the same face. And sometimes, I continued, the people you were born to eventually find their way back. Late, but still here. Mum covered her mouth with her hand. Dad slowly rose to his feet. The applause carried through the rest of the speech. After the gala ended, Dad found Nathan standing near the coat check. He stood in front of my husband quietly for a long moment. I owe you an apology. I should have been the one. Nathan, polite as always, extended his hand. With respect, sir, you should have been many things, but we are here now. They shook hands. Dad's eyes were red and he didn't let go right away. Monica sent the email on a Wednesday evening. Ruth confirmed it reached all 47 addresses. I didn't open it until the next morning. Nathan brought me coffee and quietly placed my laptop on the kitchen table without saying anything. He knows when silence is the best support. The email was only 3 paragraphs. No excuses, no dramatic emotional language. Just the facts written clearly. She had lied about me leaving medical school. She had created fake evidence. She had kept the lie alive for 5 years. She had purposely prevented our parents from discovering the truth. She ended by writing, Irene never walked away from this family. I made sure everyone believed she did. That is completely my fault. The reactions came slowly, like waves moving toward shore. Uncle Pete's wife called Ruth in tears. She admitted she had repeated Monica's rehab story at her book club 2 years earlier. Cousin David in Vermont sent Monica a very short reply. I don't know who you are anymore. Our grandmother, Nana June, who is 89 years old and the strong matriarch of the entire family, had stopped asking about me during Thanksgiving because Monica told her it hurt too much. She called me herself. I'm 89 years old, she said, her voice thin like paper but full of anger. And I have never been lied to so completely by my own family. Irene, forgive an old woman for not seeing the truth. I told her gently, there's nothing to forgive, Nana. You were lied to. All of us were. No one organized a dramatic boycott against Monica. No one sent long emotional messages saying she was dead to them. But the trust she had carefully built over 35 years suddenly disappeared. You could feel it in the silence after her email. You could see it in the replies that never came and in the invitations that quietly stopped arriving. No one openly punished Monica. They simply stopped believing her. And for someone who built her entire identity on people believing her, that silence was punishment enough. My parents started counseling in February. They found a therapist in West Hartford named Dr. Rena. She was calm, direct, and the type of woman who doesn't allow people to avoid uncomfortable questions. Mom accepted the process almost immediately. She had been carrying the weight of her silence for years like a heavy stone hidden in her coat pocket. The first time Dr. Rena named it clearly, enabling through silence, Mom broke down right there in the office. She cried for 40 minutes straight. That's what Ruth told me later. I wasn't there. It wasn't my session to witness. Dad had a much harder time adjusting. He showed up, sat in the chair, and answered questions using as few words as possible. Ruth later told me that Dr. Rayner explained something important to him. His need to always be right, his refusal to reconsider a decision after it had been made, had been the main support holding up the entire disaster. Monica created the lie, but Dad's pride locked it firmly in place. He didn't argue with the therapist about it. That alone might have been the first real sign that something inside him was beginning to change. 3 weeks into counseling, Mom mailed me a handwritten letter. The irony of writing letters was not lost on either of us. "I failed you," she wrote. "Not only when I believed Monica, but every time I chose peace instead of fairness. Every time I allowed your father's temper to decide what the truth was. Every time I saw you standing quietly in the doorway waiting. And I convinced myself you were fine because it was easier than admitting I wasn't brave enough to stand up for you." I read that letter while sitting at my kitchen table. Eppo was sleeping across my feet. Nathan was in the other room pretending he wasn't listening. I didn't cry, but I held the letter in my hands for a very long time. Then I opened the drawer where I keep the things that matter the most. Sarah's card, my returned letters, the wedding invitation that had come back unopened. I placed Mom's letter inside the drawer as well. Same drawer, just a different side. Progress is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's simply rearranging the things you carry. Monica also began therapy, her own private therapy, separate from the family sessions. I know this because Ruth mentioned it. And Monica also said it briefly and awkwardly during the second time we met for coffee. We have met 3 times now. Each meeting was short. Each meeting felt slightly uncomfortable, but each one was a little more honest than the one before. The first time she mostly stared at her hands and said nothing meaningful. The second time she told me she had started therapy. The third time she finally said something that actually mattered. And said, "Then prove it to me. Words are cheap in this family. They always have been. Show me with time." She nodded slowly. She didn't push for anything more. She didn't try to put on a performance. That was different from before. Do I believe her? Honestly, I'm not sure. I've spent most of my life watching Monica perform, and even now I still don't know where the acting ends and where the real person begins. Maybe she doesn't know either. Maybe that is exactly what therapy is meant to help her understand. But I do believe in the possibility that people can change. That is all I can give right now. She carries my surgical scar on her body, 7 centimeters on the left upper side of her abdomen, slowly fading from red to pale white over the next year. Every time she gets dressed, every time she looks at herself in the mirror, she will notice the mark left by the sister she once tried to remove from her life. The sister who, when everything truly mattered, held a scalpel with calm and steady hands and chose her oath instead of her anger. I carry her damage inside my memory. 5 long years of silence resting somewhere between my ribs. In a strange and painful way, we are balanced now. 2 sisters standing in the most unusual kind of balance sisters can have. Maybe with enough time, enough honest and simple and consistent time, we might find our way to something that isn't just balance. Maybe something better than that. Maybe something new that we have never had before. Right now, I'm sitting in my office at Mercy Crest. It's late in the evening. The hallway outside is quiet. That special stillness hospitals have after the last visitors leave, but before the night shift becomes busy again. My nameplate is on the door. My diplomas are hanging on the wall, not because I need to see them every day, but because the residents do. On my desk, there's a framed wedding photo. Nathan, Maggie, Aunt Ruth, about 30 guests, a small backyard full of warm October sunlight. My parents are not in that photo, but on the bookshelf beside it, there's a newer picture taken about 3 weeks ago. Mom and Dad are standing on my front porch. They are wearing their winter coats, and they look slightly unsure of themselves. Dad's hands are in his pockets. Mom is halfway through a smile, trying a little too hard, but still trying anyway. The picture is a little awkward. It's not perfect, but it's real. If you're watching this and you see something of yourself in my story, whether you were the person who was silenced or the person who did the silencing, I want to tell you one thing. The truth does not expire. It doesn't matter if it takes 5 days or 5 years. The truth has a quiet and patient way of appearing exactly when it is needed the most. You cannot rush it, but you also cannot hide from it forever. I didn't take revenge on my sister. I didn't need revenge. I simply became someone who no longer needed it. And that ended up being the strongest response of all. There was no secret plan, no complicated scheme, just a life fully lived on my own terms. And if you're waiting for your family to finally see you, to truly see who you are, stop waiting. See yourself first. Build the life you deserve with the people who actually show up for you. And when the others finally turn around and come looking for you, let them find a door that you control. You decide when it opens. You decide how wide it opens. You decide who is allowed to walk through it. That isn't revenge. That is structure. That is building your own life. Sunday morning, the first week of February. Light snow falling outside the kitchen window. The kind of snow that doesn't stay on the ground but somehow makes everything look calm and softly forgiven. I'm making French toast. Nathan is grinding coffee beans and singing badly to something playing on the radio. Ipo is sitting under the table, hoping that a few crumbs might fall down. The doorbell rings. I wipe my hands on a towel and walk toward the door. Mom and Dad are standing on the porch in their winter coats. Dad is holding a bottle of orange juice like he doesn't quite know what else to do with his hands. Mom is carrying a small tin of homemade cookies, her shortbread, the one she used to bake for every single one of Monica's school events and none of mine. "Hi," Mom says, nervous but hopeful. "Come in," I say. "Coffee's almost ready." Dad walks slowly into the kitchen and looks around like he's carefully studying everything. The house he has never visited before. The life he almost never knew about. He clears his throat. "Can I help with anything?" I look at him. My father, 62 years old, standing in my kitchen for the very first time and asking permission to help. "You can set the table, Dad." He nods and walks toward the cabinet I point to. He takes out plates, counts them quietly, and then looks back at me. "4?" "4." He places them on the table one by one, very carefully, like they might break if he isn't gentle enough. Nathan hands him a cup of coffee. Mom hugs me while I'm standing at the stove. Not a dramatic hug like you see in movies, just a quiet one. Her arms around me, her forehead resting softly against my shoulder. No words, just holding on. Ippo thumps his tail happily against the floor. Snow continues falling outside. The French toast sizzles softly in the pan. It's not perfect. It's not the childhood I deserved. And it's not the type of reunion movies promise people. But it's real. And real is so much more than I had for a very long time. My name is Dr. Irene Ulett. I am 32 years old, and I am finally, slowly, and carefully allowing myself to be someone's daughter again. 4 plates on the table. It's a beginning. If this story connected with you, if it made you think about your own family, your own boundaries, or someone you lost and later found again, leave a comment and tell me what you would have done. Would you have opened that door? And if you want to hear more stories like this one, check the description for another story I think you will enjoy just as much. Thank you for being here. I'll see you next time.
If you like our video, subscribe our YouTube channel for more videos.